we've invited Mary to talk about her book, Ghost Work, How to Stop Silicon Valley from Building a New Global Underclass. So I run an AI ethics book club on Twitter, and we do AI ethics Twitter chats. So typically the way I pick books within our group, we ask like what are books people reading? And we always start with here's an author and here's the book. In your case, it went the other way. I found the book and it was so incredible that I started looking you up. And I said, I wonder who this author is. And I found out that you are the author of not just this book, several other books. And your other books are In Your Face, Stories from the Lives of Queer Youth, Queering the Countryside, New Directions in Queer Studies. You were a 2016 Choice Academic title, co-edited with Colin Johnson and Brian Gilley, and Out in the Country, Youth Media and Queer Visibility.
Yeah.
I fully appreciate, I can appreciate that having a child self who's part of the LGBTQ community, and just amazing work that's being done in the space. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'll also share a brief background of you for folks who have not read up. Don't worry, I've done the research, so you don't have to. Mary is a senior principal researcher at Microsoft. You're also E.J. Safra Center Ethics Fellow.
Just for a little bit longer until Harvard starts its new season.
Wow, oh my God, this is like an amazing background that you have in so long. So I'll just do the highlights. You're also a Berkman Klein Center Internet and Society faculty affiliate at Harvard. You have a faculty position in the School of Informatics, Computing Engineering with affiliations Anthropology and Gender Studies at Indiana. One of our fellow board members is from Indiana, and we never heard hearing about it. So, and Mary, an anthropologist and media scholar by training, focuses on everyday uses of technologies transform people's lives. It's just, I'm so happy that you're here today because we have so many questions for you. So I have a mix of questions which are both for folks who have read your book, but also folks who haven't, and we'll make sure that we share links to your TED Talks and other publications as well, so they can also check that out. So let's start with the first one. We are in a global pandemic, and as it has exposed a lot of the flaws in our society and system, it has also accelerated the shift to on-demand labor. So can you share with us, what are these new jobs that are being created to solve the problems that AI can't handle?
Yeah, and the first thing I need to say is this is co-authored work. It's a collaboration with Siddharth Suri, who's a computer scientist also at Microsoft Research in the Redmond Lab, and our team, which was an incredibly interdisciplinary team based at Microsoft Research. So this is definitely, Ghost Work is the product of a lot of collaboration, which is a bit meta because it's describing exactly a world of work that is organized around tasks and projects. And so what we started out 5 years ago trying to understand, well, you know, who is involved in training artificial intelligence? That was kind of the beginning of the query. The core research question was who participates in building these technologies. It came from me joining Microsoft Research, and as you noted, my earlier research was really thinking about once products are made, once technology lands in our hands, what do people do with it? And what meaning does it take on, particularly around identity? So when I got to Microsoft Research, I wanted to understand this thing that people were talking about, artificial intelligence. It was actually a moment when big data was kind of the big news. So it turns out that a lot of people are involved, not just users generating content, but people are hired to look at data sets and create what's called clean data, clean training data for artificial intelligence. Because at the end of the day, and I think this is actually very important for this conversation, artificial intelligence, it's software. I mean, it's deployed, it's a system that's deployed, but at the end of the day, it's code that's developed to simulate or replace a human decision. And it takes not just an enormous amount of raw data, if it's ever really raw, all of the data we create interacting with each other, which many of us are not aware is kind of raw material for artificial intelligence. It takes hiring people to make sure the material is accurate. The first iteration of this was Amazon, the company, hiring people to make sure that all of the material they had pulled from public libraries to be able to populate the descriptions of books were accurate, and that they could get rid of the duplicates of books that were listed. So it's a really interesting story of this. Starts with the kind of what we call information service work that many people do in their day-to-day lives. But there's this other world of work that we discovered not long into our study, that is this world of startups that effectively are promoting a service that they hope will eventually not involve a person, but right now they need a person. And telehealth is a great example of this, or any kind of customer service where you, as a company, want to be able to offer a consumer or another business the efficiency of a quick decision. And in many cases, there's a mix of automated text and maybe a person responding to you. So every time you're on a web chat, haven't you wondered, is there a person there? Sometimes there's a person eventually brought into that loop of conversation. So that's the world of work we were studying. And this isn't a niche job. This is actually the most important thing. I hope that people hear this. Artificial intelligence generates a world of task and project-based work that isn't just solely replaceable by the time the technology is perfect. It literally produces this need to have a moment of a person brought to the table, and actually many people in a moment, to be able to offer this snap judgment. We studied content moderation, we studied text-based customer service, we studied data labeling, translation and captioning, sales lead generation, all of these kinds of tasks and projects that are nowhere near being automated. Artificial intelligence can't touch them because they require that moment of human creativity and intervention.
Thank you so much for the context. That was so helpful. So it's interesting that tech companies will have us believe, like, there's so much hype, right? AI is the new, what is it, the
Yeah.
new oil or the new gold or whatever that is. It's the new big hot thing. And yet there are all these humans who are actually powering it. And that in turn generates like this whole, sorts of issues, which is so great because we have an expert like yourself. And also, there was so much research that went into your book.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal read, with the extent of data and the research that must have gone into just compiling that so that we could then get a glimpse into this world was incredible. I was looking at, so this is a new, right? Because technological advancement, as you mentioned in the book, has always depended on expendable temporary labor.
Okay.
So let's take an example. Ghost work was used to create ImageNet, which is the gold standard of image databases.
Yes.
Can you talk about the ethics of using human labor to create a database which is going to be used for AI machine learning models?
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic question, because I think in many ways the challenge is that, let's use ImageNet for an example, and we kind of chronicle the history of ImageNet and the creation of that by Lily Fay. Sorry. That in the moment, actually, and particularly the engineers who are involved, and this is such an important takeaway for me, they're just trying to get something done. And so much of our day-to-day, when we're drawing on someone who's hired last minute or is doing something that feels auxiliary to, or peripheral to what we're trying to achieve, we just need them right away, and then we don't. And the challenge is that you can't develop an ethics of care. I loved Renee Cummings' way of phrasing that. You can't develop that out of the blue on the fly. You have to have an idea of what is the expectation of the relationship we're going to have in this moment? What's the accountability we're expecting in this moment that's going to need to be in place beyond this moment, right? So the problem or the issue with ImageNet is that no one was thinking this is task-based, project-based, project-driven contingent labor, and we should care about what we're paying people. We should care about the conditions under which they're working. A host of questions that many people don't ask. And I want to draw us all into this. This is a world in which the relationships of employment, of being able to draw value from somebody's moment of labor, are incredibly different than what we're used to. So it's not a small thing to say when a person used to get into the back of a ride-hailing app, that, you know, in the back of a car of a you know, an Uber or a Lyft, using a ride-hailing app, they're part of an employment relationship in a way that hasn't been true historically. And so it's reckoning with that. What are our new ethics of care in these new labor relationships that absolutely have historical continuity? It's not a new thing to hire someone on, you know, for a moment and discard them. It's a new thing to have an economic model that actually values who might come back tomorrow, because you will need someone tomorrow.
Well said. It's a little tragic, isn't it, when you actually think about the platforms, when you actually give some thought to it, instead of just being in the moment and say, I just need somebody to do the work, who's the cheapest, who's the fastest, let's do it. The platforms are built to do that, but in some ways it also dehumanizes them, right? The way they're designed is we are meant not to care, because we don't have the direct interaction with those folks. They don't want us to know who that person is so they can control that flow. So when you say we have to create a system of care, what is the consumer's responsibility in all of this? Like, how can we become not sociopaths who really just care, like let's get this work done, versus caring about there's a human behind this, delivering this work for us, making AI more smart. What is the consumer's or the user's responsibility towards them?
I mean, to me, you're asking a critical question, because the title of the book, Ghost Work, isn't describing a specific job or even the workers. It's describing the work conditions. And so the beginning of addressing the way in which we are effectively dehumanizing each other is precisely to start with that moment of saying, what is the value I'm getting from someone contributing their time? What are our expectations of companies that draw on this contingent labor workforce, this commons? And the value isn't just in the one person showing up. And actually, this is the other important thing about this mechanism. The value is in aggregating people who are making themselves available. So it's both someone who's available, and there's an abundance of people willing and able to serve someone, it might be a business or a consumer, in the moment. So to be able to address where we go from here is precisely to say, as an end consumer, I'm not always going to know that somebody helped me get a better search result. So for example, one of the things we studied is search result relevance. That is, it's tedious, hard work. It's cognitive work. Doing it without break is exhausting mentally. And it's the kind of work that we have, as consumers, often just heard referred to as click work. So to me, I would challenge everybody listening to think there's no work that is inherently valueless. Otherwise, it wouldn't be necessary. It's what do we do with valuing people's contributions in this new, again, I would argue, a really different orientation to how we value labor. It's not who did it best, it's who's available right now. How many people can come here right now and then leave so that I can have somebody else who might be a better fit for what I need tomorrow. That's the challenge in front of us. It's how do we value service to others? And we have a history of doing that so poorly, both as consumers and as businesses. And the other thing I would say on this is that this isn't going to be fixed by consumers. It will require society, government, private sector, public sector coming together and saying, we need new work conditions for this world of labor.
That is so profound, because just the idea that we treat human beings as expendable,
Yeah.
right there is the problem, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And it's gendered, it's racialized, it's all that we know who we treat as valueless, because we actually in this like, usually if you have to pay somebody to show up right away, you pay premium for that. So we know something's broken when people who take care of others, teachers, nurses, any custodial staff work, the people we're calling now essential workers, we have treated as though they're disposable. And that's true of these data workers as well, because we can't see them. We don't think they're doing anything that important or that hard. That's not how this labor market works, and that's not how society should work.
Great. This conversation just reminded me, as you were talking about, back in the day, there were sweatshops, right? I mean, back then they exist even now. Then we came with the laws, and we made sure that, like, and consumer became more aware, and there are laws in place to prevent that from happening. And I just envision at some point, the work that you're doing is groundbreaking, that someday I'm hoping that that is where we'll be headed, where collectively, like you said, society will come up with rules that this is not okay. You said something about women, because of course this is women in AI ethics, and we are talking about diversity in all its forms, especially marginalized groups. And one thing in your book caught my attention, and which is very surprising, is that you said despite the cultural differences between India and America, the United States, when it comes to women and ghost work, there are similarities. Could you share some more? Because I was a little surprised to read that.
Yeah, so the book compares India and the United States, and we spent almost 2 years living in the lives of the people who do this work, not just watching them do this work, but looking at, through their kindness, inviting us into their homes, looking at what does the rest of their life look like. And when we looked at the experiences of women, particularly, in both cases, women are often they're doing the second shift. They're taking care of their families. Elder care and child care are this additional expectation. We can all wish that wasn't true, but we all know that is true. And contending with that truth, like really reckoning with that reality, is part of understanding that for both women in the United States and in India, being able to look at information service work that they can do on demand, like the work we were studying, means that they can navigate and balance the workload that they have. In both cases, in both the US and the United States, women were finding ways to maintain a sense of feeling some control over their schedules, some control over who they worked with. In both cases, in both countries, women experienced sexual harassment at work. And part of the relief of this work was not having to deal with that, to deal with office politics, to deal with having to perform in particular ways. So it's quite telling, as many people might want to believe, there's some stark contrast between India and the United States, that sexism affects women in each country differently. And in both cases, being able to feel a part of the modern experience of being connected to the tech world is something that women take pleasure in and have pride in both countries.
I need to clarify, by surprised I meant I knew the similarities existed because I'm an immigrant myself, but the fact that you actually pointed it out and distilled and put data behind it was very helpful in understanding for a lot of folks who think these are just issues that happen in that other country. Whereas we know they're happening right here in the United States, and even a lot of Western countries also in the Western world also struggle with that. It sounds like we have issues we couldn't solve away,
Yeah.
We just found, it sounds like we worked around it, but for the women who are home, it's still a burden.
Yeah.
So speaking of the workers, it seems like some of these issues are universal. So can we talk a little bit more about unions and labor laws? Because I feel like the underlying context is how can government be more helpful and how can we actually avoid it? It's rooted in labor laws, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, and I just want to underscore any accomplishment in decent wages, in decent work conditions has come through labor organizing. There's never been a moment in history, and there's a chapter in the book that is this history. There's never been a moment in formal employment where labor wasn't advanced by unions. The challenge, and again, this is why in comparing India and the United States is very interesting, that in countries where labor does not have a seat at the table for government policy, for managing and directly having enough power to push where policy goes, you can see how much workers are, sorry, are you able to see me still? Because Zoom told me I was just logged out.
Uh, yes, I hope we don't
Okay,
lose you.
good. I'm not sure what
We
that
can
note was.
definitely see you and
Okay,
hear.
sorry about that. So importantly, comparing those two countries tells us that where you don't have labor organizing formally engaged in setting the terms and being the voice, the advocates that workers need, workers lose out. What's different about this moment and what labor organizing has to adjust to is that in the past, labor has relied on several things to be able to leverage its power. It has a very clear management, an employer it's navigating and negotiating with. There's a single employer. It's not distributed, it's one location. So you can have workers at a work site say, gosh, my work conditions are better or worse than yours. What's going on here? You have the ability to create solidarity among workers because they're sharing a location and sharing experiences that are comparable. You have line of sight into what's going on. And then a third component that we found there, and these are related, there's a sense of professional identity that's often connected to labor unions. They often are organizing around a specific skill or a particular past that they're gesturing to, whether it's being a tradesman. Often unions have struggled with how to be inclusive, to be diverse, precisely because their model was the breadwinner who needs a full-time job. So put hopefully succinctly, most of labor organizing has focused on the goal of bringing full-time employment to every person. But along the way, it wasn't necessarily contending with what are the other things that workers might need or want that deviates from that full-time employment path, professional path. So the argument we make based on the research that we did is that we're looking at a world where people have very different mental models of what they're doing. There's a real difference in the range of how people participate. And that means you have people who are what we called always on, who are effectively operating as full-time employees or certainly see themselves as doing this as a main form of income. They don't necessarily call this their main job, so that's a challenge. There are regulars who are this really deep bench of expertise that mean that a consumer or business, they never know that there's somebody other than someone who does this all the time, bringing their capacity to the table. And these are actually a really interesting set of people because we found stay-at-home parents, we found people pursuing other interests, people who had commitments to education, higher ed. It was fairly common. They were taking care of others. So that was part of what we surveyed. The research that we have shows these are people who have other demands on their time. They are just as important to this market. And they're not going to be full-time or even part-time workers. They're looking to stitch together a schedule and a set of projects and connections that are meaningful and useful to them. And then there's a long tail of people experimenting. They're not going to have the same needs as someone who's working full-time. So I say all this because organized labor, as one model, will have to contend with how would I offer value as an organizing body, as a voice, to such a range of needs. How would I offer value when there isn't a single employer? How do I offer value when there isn't a single professional identity? And when there really aren't clear labor laws yet, what do we want to reach for? We definitely saw workers collaborating and creating their own, I would say, guilds. And I think, to me, holding on to the reality that there are people that experience this world of work as independent contractors, in the way that I, as an academic, see myself as doing my own thing, even if I'm getting a paycheck from a company or a university. So we have to think very carefully about the organizing models that really tune in and listen to what workers want, and not just one type of worker, but really the range of workers needed for an on-demand market.
That's like, it is so complex, and there are so many factors involved, because this is a huge issue, right? Because it seems like while we were asleep at the wheel and all of this stuff happened, and we get
100%.
well, right? Because remember the promises we would get. Like, what were the promises? It's like, AI is going to make everybody's life better. Here's a gig economy. Here are jobs for everyone, right? That's what we were promised. And you buy into the whole promise and the hype, and we see Uber and Lyft are shutting down because their model does not support. It seems like the system is built to exploit rather than foster the workers. So I have so many questions there. So I'll start with one. One is unions. In Silicon Valley, where all the tech companies are, and this is the AI conference, obviously, and all of the AI, a lot of it obviously is developed right here in the Valley. There are a lot of union busting activities. So,
oh my gosh, no.
Right? What's the role of how do you get solidarity among the workers? Like you said, they work in all these different places, and even in Silicon Valley, where they do work together and they're protesting against these conditions or what have you, we already seeing retaliation. So what is a tech worker to do?
Yeah, so the Tech Worker Coalition, shout out to Tech Worker Coalition. I think they've done amazing work in getting full-time employees at tech companies to see that there's a reason to organize. That workers, again, let's go back to that basic fact. It's a fact that workers' conditions improve, and wages are just a piece of that. But this is a part of this puzzle. Workers' conditions improve when workers have voice and they have solidarity. And unions are the most effective mechanism in modern history to create conditions that that benefit the most people in a workplace setting. So hands down, full stop, that is true. The challenge is that in the United States specifically, and that's what's, comparing India and the United States, again, useful, but even more so in the United States, it has been anti-labor, so effectively dismantling private sector has so effectively countered and torn apart labor for decades, since the 60s easily, and arguably since the beginning of the industrial era, that we've, in the United States, never had that critical mass of labor movement and solidarity to get the political power that we need to create change. That's not an argument for stopping at all. So Tech Worker Coalition is an example of, it's really powerful when workers make a case for the value of unionizing in their, on site. In the United States, you cannot organize as an independent contractor. We don't have what's called sectoral bargaining of any kind. So we have some basic laws that are major barriers to the kinds of workers we're talking about, and the kinds of workers that really are the bulk of laborers around the globe from ever being able to achieve that ideal of a kind of stable full-time employment. So you could say, I mean, I won't pin this on Sid Suri, my co-author. This is kind of me going rogue. I would have rather just say, all right, then we don't need full-time employment. What we need are essential benefits for any working adult. Let's start there. You don't need a union if you can basically run around that, and then literally people can say, oh, I also need a union. But if unions are fighting for something as basic in the United States as every worker having access to health care, it's going to continue to exhaust itself. So the argument I would have is always both and. We need both the model of organizing that has been so effective, and we also need new models of organizing. The conclusion of the book has several recommendations. One of them is, wouldn't it be amazing if unions in the United States were now the keeper of our identities? That literally, I don't have to have a company know who I am. I could use my union as my representative, and a company would benefit from they don't want to be in the business of verifying people. It's exhausting if you have to do it again tomorrow. So there's a whole business model, and this is the reality, is they need a business model too. Unions have to be able to fund themselves. Well, there's a lot of value for both employers and for workers to have someone be the broker to make sure that I am who I say I am and that I get paid. Right. Those are two things that aren't being met in this market that unions could really do an amazing job. And I really hope that that's something that we can create new paths for organizing that benefits what workers need.
Agreed. So you said something very key early on. It's a cultural thing, isn't it? Where unions have had such there has been a concerted effort, right, since the Industrial Revolution, the Luddite movement, for example. Like since those times, you're looking at workers' rights being secondary to what the industries or the corporations want. So that's number one. The second is, if I were to say unions, the label you get is you're a socialist. You talk about social programs, and now socialism has become this dirty word, but they don't realize, but socialism is literally what got us the 5-day work week and got us paid leave, paternity now, right? Maternity. So I think it's so easy to gloss over why we have those benefits. We just want to get from, hey, here I am, I have a need, let's just fast forward to, I did it now.
Right.
So much work. And it sounds like the gig economy was foisted on us, even though the safeguards are really built for the full-time employee. So it sounds sexy, right, to say gig economy is creating all these jobs, but the safeguard piece is that is available a full-time employee. Like you said, everything from you have the OSHA, you have your again, you have your benefit, you have your health care, paid leave. Right. None of that really applies, and here we are. I feel like a little bamboozled, I'll be honest. Like, I wonder if
we have been totally bamboozled. I mean, I think in the United States, like, we literally too early on, and to me, it's the collision of all of these circumstances. My theory of change and power doesn't tend to believe there's a maniacal actor or any real organized, evildoer, so much as a terrible collision of circumstances and an underlying value of a lack of care, and certainly systemic racism, systemic oppression that literally keeps a group of people constantly available as fodder, makes the United States a particularly productive place for this approach to capital, to say, there are people that just don't matter. So grappling with that, grappling and really taking in that history and saying, I would like to think the pandemic is a huge reset. And I'm a relentless optimist, so, fine, call me that. But this is our moment to literally see there is a business argument, if somebody needed one, for healthcare being detached from employment. You shouldn't just have to be lucky to get a good job to get healthcare, because in fact, it's a public health risk to approach something like healthcare that way. That's just one example. There's a list of benefits that we treat as perks that historically were ways that kept people striving. An economist would be the first to say it also locked people into jobs they didn't particularly like or weren't necessarily good at. Because once you have that security, it's very difficult to consider giving that up, right? So again, this collision of tragic circumstances that mean we are where we are right now. But your point about the gig economy being foisted on us, 100%. We dismantled and have been dismantling full-time employment through temporary staffing. So let's call gig economy something old-fashioned. It's staffing. It's temporary staffing to meet needs that a firm decides are peripheral to what it actually really does and how it makes value. I'm air quoting all that because now we've entered a realm where most of our economy, the lion's share of our economy, it's a service economy. There's only 12% of economic engine driving the economy that comes from manufacturing, making things. What we do is serve each other. And we can be dismissive of that, but whether it's taking care of children, taking care of elders, or taking care of somebody's request for a coffee, we generate and exchange most of our money through services. That's actually true around the world. Most of the world organizes that service exchange informally. I'm paying you $10 to wash my laundry. I'm being paid $15 to fix somebody's shoes. That is literally how most of the world operates. So the thing technology has done and what artificial intelligence has done, it hasn't eliminated jobs, it's dismantled full-time employment. It's applied to any structured job. It can ferret out what's something that can be turned into a task because you can break apart pieces of it. And now you've got a mechanism that quite literally, it can find who can do the job, source it, it can schedule, it can manage, it can ship, and it can bill any project or task that can course through the internet. That's a lot of work. So to me, whether, yes, we were bamboozled decades ago, and we've now have an economy that's built around services that are deeply human. So technology, unlike the old days and the Luddites, there isn't like, get rid of this thing, because we built technology almost like this blanket around the most important facet, which is this person who's delivering a service. We've picked all the low-hanging fruit technologically. So the last thing left is replacing a person's decision-making. Well, don't ask computer scientists and engineers whether they think that's easy, because they think that's easy. And the problem is anybody who understands people understands the complexity of coming close to what a human can do. And that's, might sound poetic or humanist. It's just the reality of most of what humans do is read each other and empathize with each other and apologize. Most of what we do when we're serving each other is say, oh, I'm sorry, I got your order wrong. And that's beyond the capacity of computation for a hard technical reason, because there isn't an obvious or even intrinsic yes or no. And as soon as you're in the land of could be anything, you're in the land of humans.
You said something about that so poignant. You said we are trying to, the last puzzle to solve, or the last piece, and I'm not saying it's as eloquently as you. It's like engineers are trying to solve away the last piece of the puzzle, which is the humans.
Yeah.
We are literally trying to automate away humans, and there's I'm sure there's going to be another whole, can be another whole discussion of what does it even mean to be a human, and there's not, I'm sure, plenty of discussions going on. But it sounds like the system is operating as designed, right? So a lot of the API managed labor platforms assume people are interchangeable and people are anonymous, they're autonomous agents, treating human beings as being these autonomous agents who are still trying to power like the same AI that's replacing them. So I feel like the genie's out of the box. Is it even possible to reverse any of this? And as of right now, you said pandemic is a global reset. Like
Yeah.
if I were to ask you just one closing question, is where do we go from here? Like where do we even begin?
Right. So in my mind, the place we can go next is to see there's a difference between imagining people are hot swappable and imagining people are incredibly skilled at being able to step in when someone else needs to step away. That's what humans are able to do. They can operate without priors. So just speaking to my colleagues in computer science and engineering here, we know that artificial intelligence runs on priors. So anytime we're hearing bluster, and you said it beautifully earlier, like all of the, the look what AI can do, we're ignoring that in every case, AI is accomplishing something. Even once it's in the world of unstructured learning, it's accomplishing something rooted in learning from what people have already done. So to me, the most important thing in moving forward is to accept that when it comes to service economies and creative work, complicated communication, those are the two things that artificial intelligence struggles to model because they are often coming from a human without any priors. That we might not know each other at all, and I have an idea of how I might greet you that's not incredibly rude. That's not a small thing. And unless you've studied culture and society, you might not know just how complicated that is and how wrong you can get it. Now, if humans no longer care about how they treat each other, then, maybe that will be acceptable to really just fail all the time at greeting each other. But that's a trite example that computation still can't, or AI can't match. So the starting point is to say most of our economy is driven through services, healthcare, information exchange, creative work, education, as an example. What is this? This is that world of information service exchange, right? So if that's true, then we're building for a world in which people do come and go, where their expertise is called on for a project or a task, not a firm. And that means we reorient to, well, how do I make sure that someone can be available to a project or a task today and that someone else could come back tomorrow? Okay, that's very, very different. That means companies would need to cost share. They're no longer paying for the benefits of one employee. They're paying for the benefit of accessing many people when they need them. And they're paying for the benefit of having people step away when they're no longer needed. So that's step 2. Step 3 is a way in which we're acknowledging that workers have a right to advocate and voice what they need to be productive. That can't be secondary to the needs of capital. Because in fact, in a world of service, a person who is equipped to do their work well is going to produce higher quality work. So if you just want to be, crass about it, if you want to be cold about it, it's more productive to serve workers' needs. So that's the other step that needs to happen. All of this is within reach. This is not, this is not beyond our reach. The last thing I would argue we need to take in is that there is the best version of this world is equipping every worker to work, to control their schedules, to control what they work on, and to control who they work with. And that means no longer being invested in, well, if you want those benefits, you really need to work 40 hours. Like, that can't be our orientation to employment. It is fully taking in, I want to equip anyone who's giving an hour or giving 10 hours or giving 40 so that they can come and go. What would that look like? And this world we're living in right now, this is what it looks like. It looks like we're working distributed. We're finding new opportunities through these different exchanges. And the thing we're missing is a base of essential benefits that makes this manageable so that people are not exhausted and unable to contribute.
I agreed completely. And given that the brunt of these are borne by marginalized groups, women, people of color, it makes it even behooves us to take this more seriously. And to your point, because of the pandemic, this is an opportunity to take a closer look at those, because we get so caught up in the glamour of technology that when it actually doesn't work or doesn't serve us, I think we just struggle. We're not even sure. Simple example, Zoom stops working and we're like, what are we going to do? What did we do before? Like, we talk to people, right, in person. It feels like we're trying to fit so many things, solve so much with technology, and it falls inadequate. Same with AI. And I like what you said about, yes, we are going to be cross just about it because that's the language that the capitalists understand, which is doing good, being ethical, doing ethical things, taking care of your workers. It's not just gets you better results. It's actually good. It's good for business, doing the right thing. It's just making the direct connection and how to measure. So that's super powerful. Do you have any last thoughts? We're just at the last few minutes. What would you like to
I love that you're having this conversation. And to me, ethics of artificial intelligence really, the last thing I would say is that it really has everything to do with thinking before you built something. Who is this for? Who set the agenda? This connects to my earlier work. Like, fully taking in that as perhaps as the person with expertise to build something, it's very likely you're not the domain expert in where it will land. And so artificial intelligence will continue to fall short if the people who build it do not take in that the design at the very beginning, when they're thinking, oh, I want this thing that'll do this really cool trick, that is the moment to stop and say, who else will benefit? Who will bear the risks? How would I respectfully get contributions from people to inform my model? And do I have a diverse and inclusive set of people informing what I'm doing? From the data, but also at the table building it. Like, there's no way to proceed in most of these labor platforms. The reason they fail is because they literally didn't think, oh, we have to work for people who are doing the work too. These platforms actually have to function for the people who are doing their work. One of the thing that blew my coworkers, my collaborator Sid's mind was, what workers do? They back channel, they build out collaborations, they talk with each other constantly. And they, just like we do in our workplaces, they figure out how to support each other. So technology will never be the fail-safe fix. We will always be each other's safety nets. And that begins with thinking, who am I building this for? And what assumptions am I making about its value?
Absolutely. I love that. Just, you can't take the human out of the equation. That's just, you can try, and this is a world that the world built by technologists and engineers just isn't working. We need a more diverse group of people who women, non-binary, women with different skill sets, people with different viewpoints, who can come in and say, hey, there is a gap here. There is this ethical blind spot that you have, that someone who's just a cisgender white male cannot even comprehend, because they just have that narrow tunnel vision and they're designing only for people who look like themselves. So just having your voice here in this group, and we have a very diverse audience and a speaker group here. So just having your voice included was just so powerful. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Mia. Thanks. I really enjoying the conference.
Thank you. And you're in Basecamp, so I'm super excited to see you in there. And folks who want to follow up with you can always catch you there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. I'm looking forward to the rest of the evening.
Likewise, thank you. And if you want to stay, we'll be going into yoga now.
Nice.
Stretch a little, and then yes, and then we will take a 15 minutes.